Hello, my name is Noel Kingsbury, and with my colleague Annie Guilfoyle, we put on Garden Masterclass. We thought we should put this little introduction to Garden Masterclass together for those of you who've not come across us before but have arrived at our YouTube channel. We aim to put on one-day educational events with the most creative and innovative people in the garden and landscape world up and down the British Isles, and that includes the Republic of Ireland. We've also started looking at putting on events on the European mainland, and this year we had one planned in France, one in Germany, and 3 in the Netherlands. Of course, our physical events this year are having to be rescheduled, but we're trying to do what we can online. Our events take place in garden environments where there's plenty to look at. And here we've got Nigel Dunnett, for example, in Trentham Gardens, discussing with a group the planting he has put together there. Or Sarah Price, the award-winning garden designer, talking about using drawing as a design tool at Treberwith Nursery in South Wales. Here, Marina Christopher, who runs a wonderful perennial nursery in the southeast of England at Parham House, talking about how she puts together perennials for effective planting design. And landscape architect and urban sketcher Liz Ackley talking about using drawing as a design tool for people in the landscape and garden design business. Since coronavirus has constrained what we do, we've gone online. Increasingly, we are hoping to run in-depth webinars. However, for the moment, what we're offering is every Monday and Friday at 4 o'clock London time, a broadcast, round about an hour, with information, education, and some entertainment. We talk with somebody from the garden world, we look at what they're doing, perhaps sometimes we'll have a panel. So far, we've had people from Britain, Ireland, Italy, and the United States. We've got plans to speak to people in Argentina, Ukraine, Lithuania, Japan, New Zealand. So we are pretty global. Our aim is to bring together gardeners all over the world to share experiences and see us through this difficult time. If you'd like to keep in touch, do please look at our website, or if you want to receive our occasional email newsletter, then do send us an email to gardenmasterclass@gmail.com and we'll put you on our mailing list, which of course will go no further than us. So we hope to meet you online, and hopefully one day we may even meet you in the flesh. Goodbye, stay safe and enjoy this particular recording. Well, today on the 8th of April, for our very first tea garden talk run by Garden Masterclass, we've got Juliet Roberts as our guest. For many years, Juliet was the editor of Gardens Illustrated, and during her tenure of the post, the magazine became, without any doubt, the world's best garden magazine, and also really pretty much the only magazine that was truly global in its reach. We start off by asking Juliet about the day-to-day realities of running a magazine.
Dealing with some of the best gardeners and designers and plants experts around the world for me was just always incredibly thrilling. But it is hard work and very long hours, and I think a lot of people assume that it was terribly glamorous, and indeed some parts of it were terribly glamorous, but the bulk of it was actually very office bound and doing lots of admin, lots of spreadsheets. I'm a big spreadsheet expert as well. And so lots of forward planning. I think one of the things that's very unusual about Gardens Illustrated in particular, compared to other magazines, and indeed many other garden magazines, is that I planned everything a year ahead, because I'm wanted to have real control over each issue and the balance of features in each issue. And if you think it takes about a month, it takes 4 weeks to put the magazine together, which is sort of layouts and proofreading and designs and redesigns and running them to, through all the kind of systems that you have to go to, and then printing it and then getting it on the newsstand and to your subscribers. That takes a good full month. So and magazines tend to, sounds a bit complicated, but most magazines come out just before the month on the cover. So for instance, the June issue will come out at the very end of May. So for me, seasonality was hugely important. And so to get the best June gardens, I had to shoot them in June. So it's not possible to shoot them in the month they're coming out. So I shot everything a year ahead. So in June, 2020, I'd be using those features in June 2021, if that makes sense. So yeah, that was, I always found it really complicated because I'd be working a year ahead, but I'd also be working on the current issue. And then there'd be the one that had come out, and then people would say, what's in the issue that's on the newsstand? And I'd go, I don't know, I can't remember.
I can tell you what's going to be there in a year's time.
No, exactly. And I think I found that really difficult when we were sort of asked by the publishers to do blogs and podcasts and things. And actually the things that I was so excited about, I had to kind of keep under my hat because I didn't want my kind of competitor titles to know about what was going on, but I'd be hugely excited about some coup that I'd just pulled off. And I think the thing that I loved was doing a lot of research and kind of, trying to make sure I had my finger on the pulse with what was going on in the world of horticulture. So talking to designers, working out what gardens they were doing, and, something like Hauser and Worth Garden that Pete Odolph did at Durslade. I knew about that garden before it was even being planted, and I kind of asked if I could have it as an exclusive, which I was thrilled that he said we could. But he said, I don't want it shot for at least 2 years. So there's things like that are sort of percolating along. That's just why you have to have a really good spreadsheet, because you can't possibly retain all of that information. So yeah, that was really thrilling. But I mean, on a day-to-day basis, it's very much forward planning, doing research, making sure your budgets are all in line.
And dealing with 200 emails a day you were getting?
Yeah, it was. The emails kind of did me in towards the end. Yeah, a lot of emails. I think being an international magazine, so I was getting emails from all around the world. And, a lot of them are, flyers and marketing things, but you don't know that until you go through them all. And so yeah, that was one of the, I mean, sometimes I could spend all morning just doing emails and not actually doing any tangible work that would pull the magazine together.
I mean, the magazine did have a rather unique status as really the only global garden magazine, which was fantastic, but it placed a huge responsibility on you. And also I was thinking, doing your tenure of the editorship at Gardens Illustrated, that time was a kind of massacre of the magazines. It was when the magazine market, which has been such a huge feature of any literate society over the last kind of 150 years.
Yes.
And there's been a massacre of garden titles. I mean, just think of the number of gardening titles or garden-related titles that have gone down during that period. So the magazine did extremely well to sort of keep its head above water, and actually was increasing sales at times when others were going down, didn't it?
Yeah. No, I was really very proud of that. And I think with most magazines, there's a sort of trade-off between what you sell on the newsstand and what you sell as a subscriber. So if your newsstands, so typically somebody would find it on the newsstand in a shop and buy it, really like it, and then take out a subscription. So obviously that person goes onto the subscription file rather than the newsstand file. And at one point we were growing both the newsstand trade and the subscription trade, which is pretty unheard of. So I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled with that. And I think it's maybe something that a lot of people can be unaware of. I mean, and I was a magazine junkie for years and years and years. That actually the editors are under a huge amount of pressure and an increasing amount of pressure to make it financially viable. And you get publishers who are basically your bosses who don't necessarily own it, but the owners employ publishers who look after all elements. The editorial is one, but they're looking after how many magazines go out on the newsstand, how many advertising pages you have, how much you're charging for advertising, all the other elements that go to make a magazine. And because a lot of magazines are on a kind of slow decline, because the nature of magazines and the way people use magazines has changed enormously over the past 10, 20 years. Yeah, there was kind of increasing pressure. So that was quite full on. But yeah, I'm really proud that we did, not only did we, and it wasn't just me, I had the most fantastic team, who are indeed, most of them are still there, put together the magazine in a way that it seemed to appeal both to the readers, but also it was making money, so we were financially viable, but it was also kind of critically acclaimed, which I think sometimes there can be a bit of a trade-off. You can go a bit too populist and you're selling loads, but actually your core readers, you become too middle of the road. So it's kind of a balance, and I've learned a huge amount over the years. And we put some issues out that were catastrophes and bombed, and then other ones that did really well, and you kind of build up a picture of what works and what doesn't work. But I'm
sorry, Juliet, you were saying earlier on that there were a few coups, or more than a few coups, and can any particular issues that stick out in your mind as that were really, that you were very excited about, that you thought this is a real coup, or this is a real landmark? Or
yeah, no, I think there were two particularly good moments. So as with a lot of gardening titles, you sell many more in the summer issues. Of the summer issues than the winter issues, and I was always trying to not only increase sales obviously in the summer, but also in the out of season months. And one of the months that we always did, it always had a little bit of a slump, was the February issue. And because I was kind of fixated on seasonality, by the time you've kind of done frosted topiary in December and you've done frosted topiary in January, you've kind of, there's a bit of a limit of how much gardens have evolved by February. So I did a special issue, which I called the 100 must-have plants. And the first issue I did, I wasn't sure that it was going to work, but I devoted, it's the biggest feature we ever did. I think it was something like 20 pages. And the first one was, I got a number of, I don't know, half a dozen gardening experts to send me a list of their absolute must-have plants, things that were, and that was fascinating watching it coming in, and where there were crossovers, because obviously I had to sort of monitor that we didn't have repeats. So there was quite a lot of work in the background to that, and that was phenomenally successful. I think I can't remember off the top of my head what the spike was, but it was up like something like 20%. So that was like, oh my God, I can sell issues in February. But I think it was kind of giving people stuff they couldn't get anywhere else. We had amazing people writing for us. And yeah, that was a real coup. And the other issue that was always a little bit of a slump in was the August issue. I think gardens, the gardens can often be a bit tricksy in that in-between month, and also I think a lot of people go on holiday, so August was a bit of a tricky one. And again, I thought I'll come up with something a bit different, so we did a small garden special, and that was phenomenally successful as well. I mean, so much so that the publisher got really excited and kept saying, can we do more? Can we do another small garden? And I was like, oh my God, we're going to become Small Gardens Illustrated before I know it. I said, no, we're let's just kind of do it as something people really get excited about every August, and that still continues. So those were, but I think kind of just little things were, I think coming up with the seed of an idea, something had sparked something, or I'd have a conversation with somebody, or I kind of see this. I think as the editor, you're really fortunate that you're getting information from designers, plants people, gardeners, people who do products. You kind of you're a hub, and you probably see things that nobody else does. So you can kind of see things that are percolating before other people can. And so that was always exciting, coming up with the seed of an idea, kind of feeling, and then making it happen. I think one particular highlight was I wanted to do high growth, and I was conscious that there's been books on high growth, which is obviously Prince Charles's garden in the Cotswolds, and he's obviously a very keen gardener. I thought it'd be great to do a feature on Highgrove, but I wanted it to be a little bit different, because when there's so much about an iconic garden, I always wanted to give it a fresh spin. So when I contacted Highgrove, they kind of agreed to it and said, yeah, we'd love you to do it. Obviously, it had to be run past HRH and all that. And I said, I really want to send a photographer, and they were, oh no, you can use our pictures. And I said, no, I really want fresh photography that is good. And they said, that all went to and finally pulled that off. They said, yeah. And then I said, so the photographer needs to be there at about 4:30 a.m. And they're like, oh, no, we can't do that. And it's protocol and blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, they have to be there at first light. So I finally got that agreed. Jason Ingram went and did the pictures. And then as a sort of the icing on the cake, I said, what I'd really, really like, well, I think we shot it in June. I said, I'd like Prince Charles to supply us with a list of his favourite plants for June. And we got it. And it was fantastic getting that email with his favourite plants in the garden when we were shooting it. So things like that are hugely exciting. That it's a little nugget of an idea, and then you eventually see it on the page. And yeah, I was really thrilled with that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Can you remember any of his plants? No.
No, I think there was a lot, not specifically. I think there were quite a lot of roses and things like salvia. I mean, really beautiful kind of traditional English country garden plants.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I know, we're hoping to do something with you a little bit further down the line, online, about aimed at designers and, wanting who'd like to get their work and their gardens that they've designed into the magazine. And so could you just give us some little tasters and from an editor's point of view of how the best way to go about that is? Because obviously it's very important for private garden owners as well, but for people to get their work seen and to be in the best magazine.
Well, I'd say the first thing is to be aware that it's hugely competitive to get in. So for probably each issue we did between 3 and 5 gardens. So to get that slot, because obviously we have things like about plant nurseries or plant profiles or maker thing. There's other elements, but actual gardens as such are between 3 and 5 each issue. In the summer months, we had way more. I'd probably have, for those slots, I'd probably turn away. I mean, it could be 20, 30 other gardens. So highly competitive. And the other thing is that I was always trying to get a really lively mix of different gardens. So, you could have, I think people would get, I'd say it's the hardest bit of an editor's job is to turn away really good content. But you might have 2 or 3 gardens that were actually really, really similar looking, and you'd want all of them. You'd have to choose the one that somehow worked well with what else was going on. So that was kind of quite tough.
So if you were in a designer's shoes or a garden owner's shoes and or a nursery owner's shoes, how best can you present yourself to an editor then? How best can you stand out from the crowd? Okay, so I think you have to think what your kind of unique selling point is, what you're doing different to anybody else. You have to make sure that if you're sending pictures, so for instance, a young designer, or not necessarily young, but a garden designer starting out, and they would really like to get their work featured in the magazine. Magazines, Gardens Illustrated never did before and after. Loads and loads of times I would get, I've got the before pictures. We're not going to put pictures of diggers in a muddy field. It's just not going to happen. So
one digger and one muddy field, they all look the same in my experience.
Precisely. And it's hugely exciting at the background, but when you've got sort of 4-6 pages, you don't want to sort of, you want to have something that's really going to give information to the reader, information they can use themselves. So I would say, think about which garden, and think about the timing. Don't necessarily think you're going to get it shot that year. So I think forward planning. So if you're working on an amazing project, you like Pete Odorf said, I don't want it shot for 2-3 years because I want the planting to have filled out and it to look. You're only ever going to get a garden featured once.
Yeah.
We rarely featured a garden more than once, unless something substantially different had happened. So for instance, something like Gravetime Manor, we did it, and then when the new head gardener took over and did a huge amount of new planting, we did it again. So think about, lots of forward planning. Send snapshots of key elements that you think would be good. You don't want to have, as an editor, you're extraordinarily busy, so I don't want to wade through 200 pictures, often of people's cats and dogs and the tractor and the rest of it. You know, send, I don't know, 20 pictures that give you sort of highlights, but say, I have got more, you know, if you wanted more on this area or this area. And give a quick précis of what it is, what's stand out about it, is anything particularly special. But I'd also, one of the key issues is that, as I said before, the summer months, we had way more gardens than we could ever deal with, and way too many really good gardens from kind of leading designers. So it's a very competitive environment to get into the sort of May, June, July issue. But the issues where we didn't get as many submissions, you know, I loved having submissions and picking the very best and then putting the stuff in that I wanted to do to get that rich balance, as I mentioned. But the winter issues, we don't get as many. So if you had a garden that looked amazing, well, even autumn and winter, I'd say, anything that looked good from sort of September, October, through till February, even March, you're going to get fewer. So it's worth, you know, plant an amazing spring garden, plant something that's got incredible winter scent. I mean, that's the other
spring gardens are actually surprisingly difficult to find. I mean, it's easy enough to buy a load of tulip bulbs and a load of polyanthus and stick them in, but actually to actually do something that's kind of different or successful for spring is really surprisingly difficult.
It is really, and they're kind of quite rare.
Yeah.
I think the thing to think of is from, you know, put yourself in the editor's shoes. Why would they want to feature your garden?
Yeah.
How does, you know, and something that's often overlooked is the cover lines. You know, I kind of look at a feature and I'm often looking for something that would really give me a hard sell on the cover. So for instance, you know, when I put, you know, I don't know, Beth Chatto's 100 must-have plants, that issue is going to sell really well. If I put in, you know, 25 great ideas for small gardens, that issue is going to sell really well. So that would be, from the editor's point of view, if they were provided with a really good, like, little kind of hook that they could use as on the cover lines, fantastic. That would be amazing. And think about, you know, has the garden, I don't know, is there an element of the garden that's worth sort of really concentrating on? So is there an amazing, I don't know, an amazing meadow, or is there a fantastic collection of tulips, or whatever it is, that sort of little thing that really stands out? And I think it may be easy to overlook when you're the designer of the garden or the owner of the garden. But
it very often takes an outsider's eye actually to spot that. I mean, as somebody who wrote for the magazine, continues to write for the magazine, as I can't remember, I've never looked at how many articles for the magazine I wrote, but I mean, the relationship between the magazine and the writers and the photographers, you know, can be a complicated one.
yes.
That I always felt that I was essentially working through photographers, because if I sent a couple of my photographs in, very often they don't convince, not because the garden doesn't convince, but because my photography doesn't convince. I was there at the wrong time of day, the wrong season.
Yeah.
So I very much worked with photographers, which meant that I had mostly they were photographing on spec, and that as financial constraints on magazines got tighter and tighter over the years, less and less work got commissioned. I mean, the photographers always used to say, well, you know, I'd love to do that garden if they'll commission me. Well, that happens less and less over the years. And so I, as a writer, am pressuring photographers saying, well, it's a great garden, we're sure to sell it. Yes, I know it's in the north of Scotland, and I know it'll cost you a lot of money to go there, but, you know, off you go. And of course, they don't always want to do it because it is a gamble. And I felt a great responsibility to those photographers, because if I screwed up too many times, you know, they would be out of pocket, not me, and the relationship would obviously break down. I'm pleased to say we we never really, I don't ever recall any grumbles with photographers, but we had to work quite closely. But if I wanted a garden in there, I knew I just had to go to a top photographer and sell it to them. That was my
and it's sort of interesting also, Juliet, what you said about the garden in the winter, because I think, especially when I'm teaching, I'd say, the test of a good garden is, what does it look like in the winter? And actually, the test of a good garden is it carries itself through the winter. So it's sort of interesting that is the, something that's strong for the magazine as well. Yeah.
You could also say another test of a good garden or good planting, which we never actually see, is it good in black and white?
Yes, that's a very good point.
I don't know whether you ever ran any black and white. I think we better talked about it after a few glasses of wine once, Juliet, but I never remember seeing it in a magazine.
I probably was too scared.
You take a photograph of a planting, and you, of course, it's so easy, just turn it into black and white on your iPhone or whatever. And so often a really good planting will look like porridge. A good planting a good garden should be as good in black and white as it is in colour, and that itself is just a fantastic test.
Do you know, it's interesting you say that, because I went to a lecture that Luciano Jubilee did, and he did it in black and white.
Really?
And that was, he'd shot some really beautiful Italian gardens. And it was very interesting seeing how it worked in black and white and how it worked. And I absolutely agree with you that if you have that really good structure, it should really carry. Often I think from a designer's point of view, it's a really good thing to actually consider.
Structure and tonal depth.
Yeah.
Put any outdoor garden into black and white.
Yeah. Juliet, what do you think the future for magazines in general is? I mean, not being specific about Gardens Illustrated, but I mean, what do you think now about the digital and where we're going with all of that? Any thoughts?
My feeling for a long time has been that, and actually years and years ago, some colleagues when the magazine was owned by the BBC went to Korea, who were sort of very kind of technically advanced, and a lot of the magazines there, they do a bumper issue. So they produce 1, 2, 3, 4 magazines a year. And then the rest of the magazine content is online. They have really good blogs and because I think people are getting used to having information straight away. They don't want to wait a year. They don't want to wait a month. They don't necessarily, they want to know, that Pete Odolph's doing a garden next week.
Training. Yeah, I think go down short, yeah.
Microphone off. Sorry, Juliet. Yeah.
So I think that I think that magazines will get. My feeling is that particularly a kind of high-end magazine like Gardens Illustrated will potentially go down to 1, 2, 3, 4 issues a year, but they'll be absolutely kind of iconic issues. You'll really look forward to them. I think people are so busy that when they're overwhelmed with stuff, the temptation is to go, oh, enough. But then that will be supported by a really good web presence, podcasts, other content. Yeah. I think one of the issues is a lot of magazine publishers they're very traditional and they do things in particular ways. They tend to be number crunchers. And I think it's a kind of leap into the dark for many publishers, and I think understandably they're quite nervous about doing that. Yeah. So, but magazine sales are in decline. But I think whatever format it'll be, I think people are hungry for information, and I think magazines are great hubs. As I said, the editor, you kind of get to see all aspects of it, and people send stuff to you. So, in whatever way it manifests itself, I think they will exist in one form or another. But I think the current format, I mean, we didn't have a huge amount of younger readers under, say, 35. And there was always a drive to do that. But I think that had always been the case. Yeah. I think we were fortunate that once people got into gardening, and if Gardens Illustrated was the type of magazine they liked, they stuck with it, which is why we had a particularly high subscription rate, much higher than most magazines. I think it was a very particular to our demographic and also to the content. People really loved sitting in the garden and looking at the magazine and enjoying it and taking notes and stuff like that. So I also think there's increasingly there's a lot of competition for people's time, because we're all so busy and there's social media and there's a huge amount of pull on our time. That for me, I think the coffee table magazines will die a death, because I think people need more than that. And the mantra kind of I developed for the magazine was, I used to say, it's got to be a pleasure and it's got to have purpose. So whilst the magazine would look really beautiful, each feature would look lovely, they'd work together as a sort of a set, and they're beautiful photography, beautifully designed. But I wanted, so you could just use it to flick through and get ideas and look at the pictures, but actually if you read the content, you really felt you were learning something. And my aim was always that people would have the magazine, but they'd have their notebook and they'd be writing addresses down, plant names, things they wanted to kind of take that little bit further. And I think for me, I was always conscious, I'm a bit of an eco warrior, and I always felt really bad chopping down all those trees and the amount that gets pulped at the end of it. So for me, it's hugely important that magazine, each issue would stand the test of time and people would keep them, use them, pass them to their friends. And it was the idea of just having a magazine, flicking through it and put it in the recycling kind of appalled me on a personal level. So
it was the number of people who kept every copy of the magazine. I mean, it really was.
I have them here, and I've got every single copy here. Got a bookcase that has to be enlarged every 3 years to fit.
And reinforced. Yes.
No, and that is really exciting from an editor's point of view. I actually went to Chile on a press trip, and I visited an amazing designer there, and I went into her studio, and she didn't say anything, but I glanced up and every single issue of the magazine was there in her office in Santiago, and I got quite emotional about that. That's amazing. In this little office, working really hard with your team, and then you put it out and it goes off into the world, and that's very, very, very thrilling from an editor.
I also think it would be quite a nice thing to point out to everyone that we exist, Garden Masterclass exists largely to do with you, Juliet, because we worked with you on the first 2 Gardens Illustrated festivals. Yes. Noel and I helped you curate those, and Garden Masterclass kind of grew out of that, because you had a small editorial team and you were very busy and you didn't have the time to do events and things, so we just said, hey, we could do that, couldn't we? And so that's a really nice, it's really lovely that we started with you as Garden Masterclass, and then for a couple of years we were in association with Gardens Illustrated, and so that's a lovely beginnings for us, I think. And sometimes even at events people come up to me and say, you're Gardens Illustrated, aren't you? No, we're not Gardens Illustrated, we're Garden Masterclass. So, oh, whatever.
And it's very kind of rewarding from an editor's point of view, when not only you kind of start, you can't do everything, and it would have been great if Gardens Illustrated, that would have been great if we'd have carried on that relationship, but we were so busy, and the emphasis is very much on the paper copy of the magazine, because that's where we made the most money. So it's very easy to kind of get sidetracked, and you lose concentration on what is the kind of where you're making the most income. And
we've got a question from Pia, who wants to know who was the Chilean designer that you were talking about on that when you went into her office.
You're going to ask that.
Was it Therese Muller?
No, it was Therese Muller. It was an old. I always thought she was like the Penelope Hobhouse of Chile, and I can't remember her surname. Teresa. It'll come back. I can't remember. But I did meet Theresa Muller, and I went to see an amazing garden that she did called Punta Pite, and that was actually as they were building it, and that was incredible. I think she's a hugely talented designer.
Fantastic.
Teresa Chadwick. That was it.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Has anybody out there? We've got 92 people watching. So has anybody out there got any questions for Juliet? With regard to what Juliet's been talking about, or I don't know, anything else that you might like to ask Juliet. Now is your time, really, to come forward. We've got half a question. Were you ever so from Joshua, You need to, we've got half a question from Joshua. Were you ever CONV, convicted of a criminal
people,
offence?
Sorry, I hit enter before I should have. Hang on, I'll type the rest of the question.
People should be able to, if I unmute, people, there should be a little hand symbol which you press. Is there a little hand symbol that you can press to get attention?
I've got a question. Hi. Is it best to go via a well-known photographer then?
No. A mix. I know I take what Noel was saying, but quite often the editor kind of likes to have control of it. I didn't want to end up with an issue where everything's single by the same photographer. I'd like to have a balance of different styles. So I think
but while she's talking, she has to mute it.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Really good snapshots, and then get them shot. But if you did want to commission a photographer, then maybe ring the editor and ask for their advice.
I'm getting 10 messages privately from Ivy is in Estonia. Christina.
Juliet, there's a question coming in.
I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us on there. Look at where they're all from. New York, Spain, Sweden, Estonia, Canada.
Noel, I think you need to mute. You're getting too much noise.
Yeah, the trouble is, Annie, have we got Juliet? Are you still there, Juliet?
Okay. Juliet needs to unmute herself.
Unmute me. Am I okay
Yes,
now?
I'm afraid, well,
Yeah.
Juliet, there's a question from somebody about, there seems to be very few gardens from Scotland. Any idea why that was or is?
Don't blame me, that's all I can say.
Noel came up with some really fantastic gardens.
Thank you, yes.
It's to do with kind of, so how I would get to know about gardens would either writers, designers, garden owners would send me through suggestions. I'd kind of get word on the street, and we just simply didn't get that many through. If we did, I was always very keen to do, to cover as much of the country, as much of the world as I could. I think what I was always excited about was how there's this passion for gardening all around the world and for growing, and how it manifests itself in so many different ways. So I never had, to be honest, I liked having a spread of different countries. That was hugely important to me. But what was most important is what I said before, that the gardens had this pleasure and purpose principle, that there was something, they were beautiful, they were inspiring, but there was also information that you could learn from them. So it's a balance. It's always striking a balance between that. And I didn't always pull it off because, you know, they weren't always there to be had.
Yeah. Another question is, were you concerned that shooting 12 months in advance, that some trends could have been missed, or are trends not, or trends are a concern or a primary focus? Sorry, trends aren't a concern or a primary focus for the magazine. So what was your feeling on that?
I think that, no, I was never concerned about, I think gardens don't go out, you know, unlike, we're very fortunate, unlike kind of fashion or even interiors to a certain extent, good gardens kind of stand the test of time, and there isn't that quick turnaround in fashion. And I think often, particularly if I was shooting a garden done by a leading designer, they're ahead of the curve anyway. All of that information, it's a bit like the catwalk. It's going to take a while for that to ripple through. So no, that was never a concern for me.
Yeah.
The only concern I would have is that sometimes if we shot a year ahead, unfortunately things could happen in the interim. So I had, the owner died, the owner divorced, had a messy divorce, you know, all sorts of things that, you know, then moved house, and the new owners categorically said they wanted privacy issues, things like that. So that, I had that a couple of times, but it wasn't a concern for me.
Another question is, did you ever try and broaden the social class of the readership? And it's going on to say, gardening is very middle class, as am I. And that's from Tim Hewitt.
It's hugely important to me. I'm from a very working class background and from the Midlands. So, and I was acutely aware that it was very Southern centric and very middle class. So no, that was really important to me. But it is quite hard, you know, and it's, yeah, that was something that I definitely strived for. But at the end of the day, the pressure on me was to sell magazines, to get bums on seats.
Yeah,
and it was always striking that balance. And I think I definitely nudged it towards that. I think during my editorship, the average age when I took over was something like 58, and I think I brought it down to something like 53, which doesn't sound much, but actually that's when you've got a very stable subscriber subscription base. I was really pleased with that.
And what new garden designs are you seeing or interested in, and what do you think about combining perennial shrubs and food crops? That's from Eleanor Somalo.
So what new garden designs I was saying? I think, well, things tend to move quite slowly, but I think we're all becoming much more conscious of environmental issues, ecological issues, and I think the most kind of sophisticated gardens are mindful of that. So they plant for wildlife, they plant for the long term, they plant for things that will endure, they will consider maintenance issues, irrigation. You know, Beth Chatto had a massive influence and continues to have a massive influence on choosing right plant, right place. So I think over the past, as I said, I think trends move slowly, and I think it's, you know, people ahead of the game are actually always looking to nature and how things have played out in nature and using that as a source of inspiration.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, perennial shrubs, food crops, I think all of that, you know, increasingly we're going to have to try and be more, it's a good idea to be more self-sufficient. I'm a very keen vegetable grower. I always had allotments, and I've now got a big vegetable garden. I think combining all of that is really fantastic and definitely the way forward.
Yeah. Two more questions, and I think we then think about wrapping up. How important is it for a garden to be award-winning in order to be featured in the magazine?
Not at all. Not at all important. No,
Okay.
not important. It's about quality, and I think for what I can't emphasize enough, it's how the 3 to 5 gardens plus all the other features, the plant profiles, the maker profiles, the people profiles, how they work en masse. It's really, I think if you get the right balance between them, they kind of bounce off each other and they're better than the sum of their parts. So it's not just the individual gardens and features are hugely important, but I was looking at it, how the whole magazine worked.
And then the final question is, do you think that there'll be a void in a year's time as photographers can't get out now?
I think that there will definitely be fewer submissions. I believe that obviously I'm out of Gardens Illustrated now, and I'm working as a freelance writer and doing various other kind of things, creative things that I enjoy. But I know a couple of my, you know, a lot of the photographers are friends, and a lot of them are not doing international travel. But many of them are
certainly getting out and about in Britain. I know that.
Yeah, they're still getting out and about. So I think probably Gardens Illustrated, they probably won't be getting photographers traveling around the world as much. They'll probably be accepting gardens shot by people, so an American garden by an American photographer, a Chilean garden by a Chilean, that sort of thing. So there'll be less,
which might encourage some local talent, because I think it's that's been one of the issues is that I mean, personally, I always felt the magazine played a bit safe by having work in from a relatively limited number of extremely good photographers, and you know, it was actually quite a challenge in other countries. I mean, the sheer level of geographical distance in many countries, you just have to spend so much time getting from A to B. You just don't have so many opportunities. But it's so important to encourage that local talent. So that might be a bit of a silver lining here.
Yeah, it may be, and I think, you know, one of the reasons I take your point on that, and I was kind of aware of that as well, but because particularly if you're doing a commission, it's high risk.
Yes.
So
yes,
you're
yes.
promising to pay somebody a substantial amount of money to deliver the goods.
Yeah.
And I did try it a couple of times, and I was unable to run the features.
Yeah.
So you do that a few times, and you've wasted, when budgets are really, you know,
Yes,
you've
yes.
got to be really, I was always trying to get the absolute maximum amount of the budget that I could. So you do that a couple of times, and you sort of like, oh gosh, it's just easier to play safe, because you build up, after years of working with certain photographers, you build up a trust, and the images that they supply. I mean, my designer always said that, you know, a good garden photographer, it's almost like when he laid out the feature, it laid out itself. All of the elements were there. I mean, a lot of people aren't, you know, are unaware of how those features are put together. And you need the balance of, it's not just all the same distance. You need the close-ups, you need the mid-range shots, you need a glimpse of the house. And some photographers they'll do wonderful, wonderful, you know, mouth-watering individual pictures, but editorial photography is something very particular. And I always wanted that the readers felt like they'd visited the garden, kind of, you know, they had a glimpse of what it was like, and not all photographers can portray that. And I think because I was only ever going to feature a garden once, I had to make sure that I really gave it the best coverage that I could. I hate missed opportunities. So
yeah.
Well, there's one final question from Sue Townsend, and you may not politically want to answer this, but who is your favourite photographer? Are you going to name, or are you going to
say? I can't say many of them.
Possibly, you couldn't possibly, Juliet.
I couldn't possibly. It's like I'd say my favourite writer, Noel. How would I say that?
Oh wow.
No, I think there's, and actually I always liked having, I mean, I have to say I can probably recognise a photographer's work at 20 paces without seeing their name. I got to know individual styles, nuances, the way they did it, and I like having that mix. I like having, you know, in the same with the writing, I like the voice of the writer to come over, and I like the vision of the photographer, and it all adds up to have a really nice balance. And I kind of think it makes when you turn the pages, they kind of bounce along a little bit better. Yeah. Well, so, I think I think it's sort of time to wrap up, really, isn't it?
So, well, thank you so much, Juliet. That was fantastic. And a real privilege to hear from you. And so, everybody, 4 o'clock London time tomorrow.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So lovely to see familiar faces and new faces. Yeah, keep tuning in. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.